Welcome to another video of biology. We're doing the unit 4, senses and coordination, and this video is about paragraph 2 and 3, which is the skin, nose and tongue. So first we start with the skin. I have to admit beforehand there are a lot of difficult words, and unfortunately for you guys, you have to know them. So first we're going to look at the skin in general. So we're going to do a quick overview, and then we're going to look at it in detail, and finally we're going to look at the receptors. I'm going to separate these things to make it hopefully a more easily learned chunk of information. So the skin consists of 3 layers: epidermis, dermis and subcutaneous tissue or subcutaneous layer. In general, when we talk about the skin, we talk about a dermis. So yes, I know it's the middle layer, but in general, when talking about skin, we say dermis. So like dermatology is the study of the skin. Dermal application means applying on the skin. And a dermatologist is the doctor of the skin, a skin doctor. So yes, it's the middle layer, but also dermis in general means skin in general. First layer is the epidermis, so the upper layer is the epidermis. It's the upper layer of skin. It protects the deeper laying tissues or the deeper skin layers. It gets its name from epidermis. Epi means on, atop, above, over. Like an epilogue is a little piece of text which starts at the beginning of the book before all the chapters even start. So before, in this case. Epitome means like the biggest and the best story you can imagine. So epidermis is the skin layer on top. So the first layer is the epidermis. The dermis is the skin layer where you can actually find all the parts of the skin where we go into detail. So I describe here all the goodies are located in this layer. Like receptors, muscles, blood vessels, hairs, hair follicles, but we'll get back to this in a second. Finally, we have the third layer, which is the subcutaneous layer, which I misspelled here. The subcutaneous layer is a layer of fat cells. And the layer of fat cells, sub is like subway, it's underneath. The subway is underneath the streets, so subcutaneous is the skin layer underneath. Oh, we'll get function later. So the epidermis, so the first layer, consists of 2 layers. Okay, my apologies, a difficult picture is gonna come now, but it's just to show you that a schematic drawing and what you actually see under a microscope is very similar. So I'm sorry for all the difficult words. Just look to the left picture and you see that there is a layer of flat cells and a layer of thicker cells. And when you look at the microscope, you can see that you also see a layer of flat cells and a layer of round cells. All you guys have to know is layer of flat cells is the corneal layer. It consists of flat and dead cells. These flat and dead cells have the function to protect you. This is to protect the cells from drying out and from infection. For example, a bacteria needs a living cell to reproduce in. So when it touches your skin, it will make contact with the corneal layer, but those skin cells are not alive anymore, so it won't have any nutrients to reproduce in, so it's no problem. So it protects you, dehydration and infection. And the best part is, for example, if you scratch your skin a little bit because you're itchy, you're not immediately scratching away living cells, you're scratching away that corneal layer. So if you finish scratching, you have a bunch of dead skin cells underneath your nails. And it's nice that they're dead, so you don't lose any nutrients or valuable that you don't lose any valuable nutrients. Best part is the corneal layer is easily replaced by the basal layer. Because you can see here the basal layer consists of these nice thick cells, and all they do is they divide, they reproduce. One cell becomes 2 cells, 2 cells becomes 4 cells, and so on. That's all they do. They divide so they can become a corneal layer. They divide so they can become dead flat cells. So together they're the epidermis, and actually the corneal layer is the only one protecting, but the basal layer is to replace the protector. And that together is the epidermis, protecting the deeper skin layers. Now we continue on to the dermis. As you can see, in the dermis you can find a lot of structures. We start with the sweat gland. Guess what the sweat gland does? It produces sweat. When you start to work out, for example, when you start to run, what happens is your heart starts to beat faster, blood gets pumped around, and you heat up. Your body doesn't like a higher temperature, so it tries to cool down. And that's why sweat is produced. Your sweat goes onto your skin. The skin then has a layer of water, and that cools us down. So that's what sweat does. We continue on to blood vessels. I hope by now you have an idea what blood does. If not, blood provides surrounding tissues, so in this case the skin, with oxygen and nutrients, and it takes away the waste product. So we have sweat, we have blood, then we continue on to the hair and hair follicles. So this long brown strand is a hair, and the pouch of skin in which it's covered is the hair follicle. So if you pull out a hair, as long as the follicle is okay, the hair will grow back. In our case, it's not that obvious anymore, but the hair is there to protect you and to keep you warm. You can see it when we get cold. Oh yeah, there's also a hair muscle which controls the hair. But when we get cold, for example, you get goosebumps. So all these little lumps. So you get cold and your body is like, "Ooh, I need to warm up." So the hair muscle gets triggered to make your hair rise. So imagine we're big fluffy animals and our hair goes fluffy, and then it keeps us warm. In our case, we just get this little bumpy skin because we are hairless animals. Or well, not hairless, but we have very little hair. There are animals in which they still are covered with hair. They also use it to communicate. So this fluffy ball is not cold, but it's angry. And now it's using its hair muscles to say, "I'm a big, dangerous animal, look at me being big and dangerous." It's making itself puffier and bigger. Well, normally it's not a skinny cat, but as you can see, it's a lot tinier. Its hairs are flat now, so it's nice and sleek. So that's pretty much the hair. It keeps us warm, it protects us, and also we use it, well, we don't use it to communicate, but other animals use it to communicate. Then added to the hair follicle is this little gland, as you can see. It's called the sebaceous gland. The sebaceous gland makes sebum. Sebum has a specific function. Wow. It keeps the hair lubricated and flexible. For example, if your hair dries out, it can break more easily, so it damages. Also the skin, if the skin dries out, your skin can crack more easily. It's not a huge problem, but we want that corneal layer to stay alive to stay intact as long as possible. So the sebum keeps the skin lubricated, oily, and the hair oily. So for example, if you don't wash yourself for a very long time, you might notice that your scalp, skin of your head becomes more oily. That's the sebum doing its job. Then finally we get to the subcutaneous layer, so the layer of fat cells. Well, fat is made by energy reserve, so you eat and then you have energy left over from the food, because or you did not use it all up, or you ate too much, and that energy gets stored in fat cells. Fat shapes our body, so if you, for example, have for example, very easily, the breasts of women are consisting of fat. Men don't have these fat deposits, so they have a flatter chest, while women have these lumps on their chest. Women also have fat deposits in their hips, so they have rounder hips, besides the fact that they also have rounder hip bones. Besides that, a fat person has a very different body shape than a person who has a very low percentage. So it shapes the body. It keeps us warm and cool. Person with more fat tissue keeps him or herself warm longer, but also it keeps him or herself cool longer. Then finally, it protects us. For example, if you have very low fat percentage and I would smack you on the leg, I would immediately hit your bone. Well, if you have a very high fat percentage, you would have like fat tissue cushioning that blow. You can see this when, for example, people with anorexia often have a lot of bruising, because everything they touch, for example, they sit down too quickly or too roughly, there is no fat to catch the blow, so they immediately damage the blood vessels in the dermis and the bones underneath, so they bruise more easily. So fat is also to protect us. Then we have, so that was pretty much all the details you need to know about the skin layers. After which we can continue on to the receptors. What's important about these receptors is A, that you know all 5 of them, but also where they are located in the skin layer. Also, what receptor triggers what, so that you can tell me that a heat receptor registers heat and that a touch receptor registers touch. So in this picture you see the dermis with the touch receptors. We have 5. A pain receptor, which is already located in the epidermis, but also what this picture doesn't show, also in the dermis and very low in the dermis. There are different levels of the pain receptor, because A, there are different levels of pain, but the epidermis, if you trigger that pain receptor, doesn't immediately result into pain. It's usually a combination of all 3 layers that tells you, oh, this is pain, be careful. We have cold receptors pretty much in the middle of the dermis. We have heat receptors also pretty much in the middle of the dermis. Finally, pressure receptors. You can imagine that pressure, which if you touch your skin, it requires a little more pushing before you actually feel pressure, so that the pressure receptor is deeper into the dermis, while a touch receptor is on the shallow part of the dermis. You touch your skin and you feel a touch, so it's on top of the dermis. So these are the 5 receptors which you have. So this was pretty much the skin. So we talked about the 3 layers of skin in general, the epidermis, dermis, and subcutaneous layer. We continued about the skin in detail, so their functions, so protecting, having all the goodies, and shaping, keeping more protection and keeping warm, but also the extra layers and the functions of the goodies inside. And finally the 5 skin receptors, so that you know that a heat receptor senses heat and the touch receptor senses touch. That was the skin. We continue on to the nose and tongue. In the nose and tongue we're going to look at how the nose is built up, so which parts we find in there, and the receptors in the nose. Same goes for the tongue, how the tongue is built up and the receptors in the tongue. Most importantly in this paragraph is the nose and tongue working together. Why and how? So, when we look at the nose, you see that there is a big hole. We call it the nasal cavity. So, nose cave is called the nasal cavity. The skin of the nose, so the inside of the nose, is covered with a slimy skin, a mucous membrane, which we call the olfactory epithelium. So the inside of the nose, the skin, is called the olfactory epithelium. The olfactory epithelium has two types of cells. The pink ones you see at the bottom, which are the mucus making cells. They just keep your skin moistened, and in case they are working a bit harder, they make boogers. And we have smell receptors. So you see the colorful cells with the tentacle-like structures on the end. These are the smell receptors. The tentacles, the finger-like structures, are called cilia. They actually capture or come in contact with the odor molecules or the smell particles. So the cilia come in contact with smell particles. That activates the cell, and that one sends a signal back to the nerves saying, you smell this. So that was pretty much the nose. So now we continue on to the tongue. The tongue, if you ever see a tongue up close, you see that it's all bumpy and has all these little grooves. The grooves are called papilla. The papilla are these little, they're really grooves. And inside of those grooves you find these tiny little balls. These balls are what we call a bundle of receptor cells, also known as a taste bud. Finally, at the end of a groove you find a mucus secreting gland. So a little gland that makes mucus. This one is, for example, you're eating something and a bit of onion comes into your groove. You don't want to taste that onion 2 weeks later because that onion is still stuck in the groove, in the papilla. Thanks to the mucus secreting gland, that piece of onion also gets out of the groove. It clears it. For example, if you watch these cooking shows and the judges are judging a dish, you see that they're drinking water after each dish, just a sip of water, to what they say to cleanse the palate, to help the mucus secreting gland to get everything off the tongue and out of the grooves. This is what the mucus is doing, except on a microscopic level. So once again, the tongue is full of grooves. These grooves are called papilla, and in the grooves you actually find these little balls of receptor cells called taste buds. The taste buds come in contact with the food and say, this is salty, or this is sweet, or this is whatever it happens you are eating. So that's pretty much the tongue. Now, the tongue and nose together, as you can see in the picture, the cavities, they are connected to each other. It might be in the back of the throat that they finally come in contact with each other, but they are connected with each other. So it's not weird that they actually share functioning with each other. You can't, for example, if you smell something, like you're cycling home after school and someone's barbecuing and you smell it, at some point you might actually taste the meat that they're cooking, or like you get water in your mouth because you really can imagine eating whatever they're eating. And that's because, well, taste and smell are really connected to each other. Other way around, if you eat something and you keep your nose pinched off, so that you really keep your nose closed, you probably won't taste it as well, or you might not even taste it at all. That's really because together they make the sensation better. Why is it biologically convenient for us that the nose and mouth are working together? This example you can see when you take milk out of the fridge and you want to take a sip. Probably the second you're about to take a sip, suddenly you smell that it's really sour, just before you take a sip. And in this way, it might or might not prevent you from drinking the milk. It gives you a heads up of what you're about to put in your mouth. This could prevent you from poisoning yourself or eating something harmful, and hopefully protecting you. And this is how I want you to imagine the nose and tongue working together.